Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stop Being the Best Kept Secret. I am your host, Dr. Tana M. Session, organizational development strategist, DEI thought leader, and HR transformation consultant. And I am pleased to be back for part 2 of the interview. Hopefully, you listened to part 1. If not, rewind. You've got to listen to part 1 of this interview because I'm here today with Miss Joan Mulholland and her son, Loki Mulholland. And she is a civil rights icon. If you don't know her, Google her. You will be so impressed with what you learn about her, just as I was, which is why I knew I had to have her on the podcast. So Loki, I want to start with you. Okay. So we spent some time in the first episode kind of going through the journey of your mom and civil rights, how she got involved in it at the tender age of 10, just having awareness to know that this is not right. And then as she became a teenager and started college and getting involved in the nonviolence protesting. So what did your mom share with you about the civil rights journey while you were growing up?
Well, she didn't really, quite frankly, to share that much. That was just what they did. Now, we would hear some of the stories and things like that from her friends when they would all get together and chop it up and such. But at the end of the day, that was just kind of who they were. And we
just old folks talking.
Yeah. And, it was like, we were kids. We wanted to play with our friends. And so it was like we had to sit there politely and listen for like 10 minutes and then we could leave. So, but I think, I think part of the problem, one of the things we run into a lot is, when we talk about my mom's story and those of like John and Hank Thomas and others, is we focus on these big events and these things they got involved in, that are captured in these, monumental, photos and such. When really, as we talked about in the first episode, was, my mom's journey begins when she's 10. Yeah. And that level of awareness. But what she does is she sees something is wrong and she says, I'm going to do something about it. She didn't say this is wrong. Oh, well, what can I do? Or can you take care of it? Hopefully someone is. She says, you know what? I see the problem. I'm going to do something. And so that's, to me, that pivotal moment for all of us is, everything after that's is the aftermath of that, is the impact of that action. And so we all have to get to that point where we can say, you know what, this is wrong. I'm going to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. And a question for both of you to consider is, what is your personal belief about civil rights in the state of the country now? So it's 2023.
We're moving backwards.
I'm sorry, Ms. Joan?
We're moving backwards.
Moving backwards. Mm-hmm. That's scary for me to hear that from you, considering you were there.
But at the same time, I'm hopeful.
Okay.
We're definitely moving back, and we should be, very cognizant of what we're seeing in places like Florida of erasing that history, of trying to rewrite the narrative. That's the same thing that was happening in the early, just 100 years ago, with the United Daughters of Confederacy, rewriting the slave narrative, and the happy slave narrative, right?
Right.
The lost cause and stuff that would, usher in particular, the lynchings and the mob violence and so forth. Not that that wasn't happening before, but it really kicked into overdrive, and this sense that they lost something, and that if they could make America great again, to be what it used to be, right? And we're seeing those echoes again, and so we need to be willing to, and we've seen that. We're seeing people who are standing up and fighting against that. But let's not kid ourselves. All these things can happen. Just because it's America doesn't, look, it's happened before.
Yes,
right. So let's not kid ourselves and think it's not going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the signs are there. And so we just need to be extra vigilant. But I also see that hope, and that I see that amongst young people today, who are aware of what's happening and want to learn more and know more. My mother and I speak to a lot of young people, and we see that in them. It's that same passion, desire to make this world better for everyone that that they had back in the 50s and 60s.
Well, the redrawing of political maps for members of Congress and state legislatures and all that, and they keep diluting the black vote the way they draw the boundaries.
Yeah. It's almost like the redlining that they did in the housing industry, they're doing that in the voting districts.
Right.
You know,
Well, I
with
mean,
power.
1890 with the Mississippi Constitution, that basically outlawed black voters. Made it that much more difficult with poll taxes and so forth. And so we see those things today.
We had poll tax in Virginia too.
Right.
That was before your time, boy, but
Yes, of course not.
And
yeah.
what do you have for the young people? So I have a son, he's 28 years old, and he is disillusioned about the state of the nation and where we are. He feels like nothing's changed since the civil rights movements of the 60s, and we're no further along as Black people in this country as they were back then. Now I argue the opposite, and I give him examples of where I see that there has been progress and movement, and he's definitely a product of that. But do you hear that from the other young students and children, young people that you talk to or meet in this work?
There is that level of disenfranchisement in the like that people have a sense of, and there is that but there's that searching for an answer of what can we do. And so when they meet someone like my mom, I'm going, okay, if they could do it, and you got to understand what they were up against versus what people are up against today are two different things.
Yes.
So much more entrenched, but also a lot more upfront, right? Now you have a lot of seemingly polite racists, and there's things a little they've learned a few tricks and they're applying those, but the game is still the same. And so the what worked then continues to work today. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, if you want to change something in this country, you have to vote. That's why they work so hard to take it away.
Yep.
Redistricting and everything else, and voter ID and the full 9 yards. We had a student once who said to us, well, why should I vote? My vote doesn't matter. And I said, well, it matters so much that they're doing everything they can to take it away. Consider that. They know how important that one vote is. So they're going to do everything to make you feel like it doesn't matter. And that's more so why you need to vote. That's the civil rights activists realize that. Yes, we can ride on buses and set the lunch counters and do these things, but if you can't change who's in power, nothing's truly going to change. And we're seeing that, right? You can see that in Florida, what's going on, what the power structure is doing, and in Texas and elsewhere. But
even Virginia,
right?
But you had a first elected Black governor in the history of the United States was Doug Wilder, who served in Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. But we're still moving backwards.
Right.
Yeah.
My mom, well, you're like doomsdayer today, Mom. Good grief.
Say what?
You're such a doomsdayer today. Really apocalyptic. But yes, but at the same time, Mother, you look at that, and again, it comes back to the vote. And Lou Von Braun, who's a freedom fighter that's in the film The Uncomfortable Truth that we did, he said, look, let's not kid ourselves. We don't have slavery. We don't have Jim Crow. We don't have legal segregation. So yeah, things have changed. But there's still that work to do. And again, Joanne Bland, she's actually in a photo over my shoulder right here. 11 years old. She'd been arrested about 13 times when she was knocked unconscious on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during Bloody Sunday. She's still at it, and she still talks about the importance of voting, because it's that critical. And as Vernon Dahmer said on his deathbed after he had fought back against the Klan when had a shootout with him as they were firebombing his home, he said, if you don't vote, you don't count. So that's what's so critical.
Yeah. Same thing I share with my son as well. And that's where his disenfranchisement comes in mostly, is with the voting, because he feels like because of the electoral college, they could sway whichever way they want. It's not always the popular vote. And so we were having this great debate over Thanksgiving dinner, as you can imagine. The best place to talk about politics. It was like,
Oh,
okay, enough. I have a headache. I don't want to talk about it anymore. But you're right. You know, they have more information available to them now
yeah.
very easily versus, you know, when your mom and her generation was doing this work, and they can just like they did with the summer of 2020, they can, you know, through a text, through a TikTok video, through
Yeah.
a post on social media, they can rally forces around a movement and make a movement happen, like we saw in the summer of 2020. So I hope that they continue with that energy, and that's what I'm trying to encourage in him as well.
But but if you don't vote, your candidate won.
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
lost the right to complain about it because
Yeah.
you said it's okay whoever wins. So if you
Mhm.
don't like who's in office and you didn't vote, that's on you.
Yep. Yep. So I have another interesting question for both of you, because I've had some friends who told me this has happened to them and they were either caught off guard, they were a little surprised, or they weren't really sure how to respond. So have you ever been in a situation where you are around others who identify as white, and they've either said something, whether it was a joke or a remark or a comment that was discriminatory against another race, let's say a Black person? And if so, how did you address that? What was your reaction?
Well, I can't remember specifically, but my reaction would be, shut your mouth.
Well, Mom, I mean, as a parent, you had a situation wherein a teacher asked you why your son didn't have enough white friends.
Yeah, parent-teacher conference. She was concerned that Django didn't have many white friends. And I went home and literally wrote out in cursive a list of everybody whose house he went to play, everybody who came to our house to play with him, and anybody else he talked about as a good buddy. And he was within 1 percentage point of the school demographics. The school was about a third Black, a third Southeast Asian, and a third white. And I went back to that teacher and asked her, showed it to her, and I said, now, why isn't this true of all the students?
Mm-hmm.
And
She didn't have a response, but
You have an answer?
nah,
but at the same time, I mean, there's a um, purposeful action, right? There's real intent into what my mother did.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, oh, that's stupid racist,
Yeah.
whatever. It was, okay, let me analyze this. Let me do the work that's required. Obviously it's hard to, probably the hardest to say things with friends. When you're in a group of people, you don't want to stand out sometimes, but that's definitely, it's the shut your mouth approach. It's I've already found that offensive. That's not none of that's funny. Knock it off. And sometimes you have to decide who's going to be your friend. Some people won't change.
Yeah.
We need to be, if we really want things to change, we have to allow people to change. That's important. And so sometimes we kind of get in our heads that we're just going to blow people up on social media, whatever else. Let me know how when's that ever worked for anybody. I had a situation, it wasn't race related, but it was I had a coworker who made some homophobic statements about some other coworkers, and it just caught me off guard that I didn't even know what to say. This was actually where we were returning back from a reward trip, and I was like, "What?" He says, "Oh, I mean," and it was as benign as using their phone and had little earbuds, and they're plugged in one end, one the other, and listening to some probably watching a YouTube video or something. And we were waiting at the airport, and he goes, "I mean, I think it's disgusting, but good for them that they feel comfortable around us." I said, "What? What do you?" I was like, "What?" He goes, So I just I left it there. I had no words to respond. I wasn't prepared for that. Now, if he said something racist, I was prepared. Right. But then as it kept, I've kept rolling through my mind going, okay, I can't leave this alone. So I called him when we got back, that evening, and just said, hey, there's something you said, right? And he says, what? So I explained to him. He goes, oh, hey, you know what? Look, I have friends who are gay. It's like, okay. I was like, well, how do you think they would feel if they heard you say that? So I asked this question, this simple question, walking them through something. And he was like, I never thought of that before. I said, now I want you to understand something. My silence wasn't acceptance. I just didn't have words. But I could have beaten myself up and walked away from it and moved on. But instead, I circled back around in a calmer setting when I could collect my thoughts and my argument, if you will, and laid it on the table for him. And then let him know, hey, look, because he it appeared that he was, quite, surprised by what he had said and so forth. And, I have friends who are gay, that sort of stuff. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to give you a pass, but I'm putting you on notice as well. So I said, hey, look, I want you to make aware of this, that if I hear that you've said this again, or if you've said something like this, this is definitely going to HR. Right. Yeah. But I want to give them that opportunity to change first. But so those are the sort of situations we run into where you have to make that active choice. And one of the things I think is important that comes to mind when I talk about this is thinking back to the civil rights movement. And you brought this question up earlier with my mother was, did you ever have any of that nonviolence training? So they actually trained for how to respond to situations when you got attacked. So, because if you couldn't get your nonviolence on today, so if you didn't listen to episode 1, go back and understand what that means. Yeah. But if you couldn't get your nonviolence on, so you had to have this training on what to do. Well, we need to be prepared to train ourselves and have that knowledge base with us on how to respond when something happens. How do we intervene when we see something taking place? It doesn't have to be, someone attacking someone physically, but how do we stand in those gaps? Emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically, and that we can practice that within our minds, or with friends and stuff, to know how to do that. That's something that seems to be missing oftentimes, is how can we actively engage? Because too often, once that time passes, we beat ourselves up and move on.
Yeah.
Very few times you get someone like my mother who goes home and goes, all right, well, I'm going to show you, and does the math, right. And then goes back and shows the teacher. So
no, thanks for that. That's helpful. I think a lot of people have struggled with, they see or hear something that they know is offensive, even if it's not directed at them or it's not something that they're personally impacted by, to be able to speak up in that moment and truly be, a bystander ally, right? To be able to say, hey, that wasn't okay, or I didn't find that funny, or what made you say that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's because we're so used to not talking to people directly.
Yeah.
Social media makes it so easy to, to attack someone who says something racist, or to jump in and chime in with everyone else. Mm-hmm. It's when you actually have to do it in person. That's a different game.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just like the people who would send hate mail, to the civil rights activists. It's real easy to write a letter. I mean, the fact that you're consciously actually doing that and putting a stamp on it and putting the mails, next level anyways. Right. But a lot of those people are cowards. And they don't do that when you're in face-to-face. Face-to-face is a little different, but that's where the real work takes place, is that one-on-one. And conversely, yes, we can do, be social activists online. My friend of mine called that slacktivist. But there is a place for that, to do some of that work online, right? In social media. But at the end of the day, that one-on-one is where the real change takes place.
True. Thank you for that. And I do want to talk a little bit about what are your thoughts around the overturning of Roe v. Wade and affirmative action by the Supreme Court as it relates to civil rights?
I think it's a denial of civil rights by the Supreme Court. And I think we need some new folks on the Supreme Court.
Hear, hear.
It's once again, white men policing bodies. Sure. So it is a direct result of not voting.
Yeah.
Let's just be fair. I mean, who selected those people? If you don't like who got selected for the Supreme Court, you should have voted.
Yep, exactly. We gotta learn how to play the long game.
Right.
Because these are for life judges, like they're not going anywhere unless they decide to retire or unfortunately they pass away. Otherwise, they're there for life.
Yeah. Look, they're playing the long game too.
Yep.
You know, they just waited. Okay, you got Obama for 8 years. All right, we'll wait. We'll buy our time. We know you're not going to have Obama forever. So they started working on it. The second the Supreme Court ruled, and I'm blanking on the case, Shelby versus Holder, I think it was, about the Supreme Court about voting rights. Second, the Supreme Court, did that. All of these bills suddenly appeared for rolling back voting rights.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? They knew it was coming, so they were prepared, but we weren't.
Yep, exactly. And then what are your thoughts on the recent backlash around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? So I want to end with that question.
Go ahead, son.
It's a space I work in more than my mother, I guess. My mother is the to me, the epitome of the work that we should be doing, the example of what white people in particular, should be doing. So, but the rolling, we shouldn't be surprised by it. There's always, 2020 was this massive uplift of organizations, companies dumping money into causes and so forth, and just, oh yeah. But there was no foundation for these organizations to start with. It was just the what's the word I'm looking for? It's
reactionary.
It's reactionary, but performative.
Performative.
A lot of performative work going on there. We did our part. We wrote our check or whatever. Or we, as an organization, we felt something, and we as a CEO or whomever, and decided to slap something on our website and hire a bunch of trainers and stuff and put people through the work. But once they found that employees were getting tired of it, if you will, certain employees were getting tired of it, that it was like, oh, this is costing us money, which they don't understand that, employees either will cost you money or make you money. When it happens, this is why you need DEI, because quite frankly, the racism still continues, the sexism and everything else. And we're seeing the net results of that. But again, there's that ebb and flow that takes place. But what we're seeing as well, despite that organizationally companies are trying their best to kind of not, they're going to have that position, but they're not going to give it any power. That, at the same time, I'm seeing the ERGs, employee resource groups and stuff, that are taking some of that power upon themselves and making sure that the work continues to get done by having these employee-wide discussions and so forth. It is organizations kind of, sloughing off the responsibilities from the top.
Yep.
But it's nice to see that the employees are empowering themselves in that. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, real change doesn't take place in organizations unless you got buy-in from the top. And if the CEO or the top executives aren't on board and really believe in it, and we've seen where organizations have that, then it's not going to be sustained. But look how many more companies that's now part of their supposed DNA. So, there is a move forward. So you got a lot more organizations that are now engaged, that understand the need for DEI, and so forth. But it's moving away from that performative element and getting them back into that engagement. And sometimes it's just, those words get attacked.
Yeah.
Okay, so then maybe we just need to change what those words look like, and make sure that everyone's involved and sees their place within it, and how they can be change agents as well.
Thank you for that. And I'm sorry, I do have one final question for both of you. So Ms. Joan, I would love to hear from you. As a country, where do we go from here?
Forward, I hope.
What does that
We
look
need
like?
just accepting people as people and working for peace in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And Loki, I want to give you an opportunity to tell everyone about your book and a little bit more around the work that your foundation does before we wrap up.
Yeah. So our foundation is the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation. I named it after my mother.
Without asking permission.
She's the only mother that complains about her children honoring her, but okay. But yeah, so it you know, it was founded on this idea that preserve, share, and continue my mother's legacy and teach others about civil rights movement and how they can make a difference. And we say we exist to end racism through education, through the films that we do, the curriculum, professional development, DEI, and so forth. And one of those elements as well is our newest book called Get Back to the Counter, 7 Lessons from a Civil Rights Icon. And it's a book. We don't frame the book anything like self-help or leadership, or even activism. That people have taken it upon themselves to frame it for what they need, which has been exciting to see. So it's a great book that takes these 7 principles and illustrates them through my mother's stories and how they use these principles to move work forward, either in their personal lives or in general throughout, during the civil rights movement. And those elements of leadership and everything, percolate through that. They're very universal concepts. So it's another way of learning about the civil rights movement and how to make a difference and apply that in your lives as well. So,
Right. And where can they find the book?
it's on Amazon, and we also have it on our website as well, the JTM Foundation. And that's where we have other content as well.
And you've got a bunch of kids' books.
We got kids' books and films. We've got, my mom's mug shots on a T-shirt even. Which is
okay. Did you get her permission?
Yeah.
Of course not.
No, and we have different ones. Say History Matters or those sort of things. My mom has a very special one that says, "This is my government issued ID."
Okay.
She calls her TSA shirt, and mine says, "My mom's an ex-con."
Okay.
But we have other things like that. But just that all supports the foundation, the work we do with scholarships and assemblies and whatever else. Just education in general is our focus.
Great. Well, Miss Joan, any final words before I let you get back to your day? I really appreciate you hanging out with me on the podcast.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And folks, get out there and change the world for the better.
Yes. What about you, Loki? Any final words?
Amen, and pass the gravy.
Well, you have some big shoes to fill, and I know that you're doing the best out here that you can to represent her well. And I'm glad that she allows you to use her name on the foundation at this point. There's some acceptance there. And I will definitely have to get that T-shirt. So I'm going to look for the T-shirt on the website.
Right on.
Right. Thank you so much for hanging out. This is Dr. Tana M. Session, host of Stop Being the Best Kept Secret. I hope you all enjoyed this conversation as much as I did with Miss Joan and Loki Mulholland. And so honored. It's such a privilege to have both of you here. Thank you for saying yes to my bizarre, out of this world request to interview both of you. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to us staying in touch. I'm going to continue to watch your journey and what you do, and whatever I can do to reciprocate the work that you do and share it, I'm happy to do so. So thank you.
Thank you.
God bless.
All right.
Keep on keeping on.
Yes.